Hello and welcome to Free Hit, an FPL podcast. I'm your host, Chris, joined by my co-host, Jace. Jace, how was your international break? I'm not sure what you did with all the free time you had on Saturday and Sunday morning this week. Anything productive? Anything to note?
It was nice. I actually did what you suggested. I got outside and touched grass. We went for a nice hike at Eagle Creek. Watched some basketball. I did get my soccer fix in with some MLS games throughout the weekend, and of course, watching our boys in red, white, and blue win yet another CONCACAF Nations League. So, not completely devoid of soccer, but it was nice-ish having that free time in the mornings. Slept in a little.
Love to hear it. How's your basketball bracket doing? We didn't talk about March Madness at all.
Busted immediately, yeah. I have a history of picking Kansas to go all the way every year, and it worked out one year. Didn't this year, so pretty stifled there. But I got a lot of stock in NC State, and they seem to be gaining some momentum. So maybe they'll pull it out for me. How about yours?
Do you think Kansas is the Arsenal of the NCAA tournament?
I have way too much respect for Bill Self and Kansas to compare them to Arsenal, so I'm not going to go there.
All right, fair enough. My bracket's good. I feel like in playing the bracket games, it's almost very similar to FPL, where it's a game that you have assets in the game that multiple people can own, which is very different than some other fantasy games out there. So I was thinking, how much, like, for example, Connecticut, having Connecticut going far in your March Madness bracket is similar to having Holland on your FPL team. And that's because I'm what we call in the industry a sicko, because I cannot get FPL or soccer out of my brain. I think especially since we've started this podcast. So I feel like even when the FPL stuff was off, I was trying to disconnect. I was still in the back of my brain like, oh yeah, I wonder who this would be like in FPL. And honestly, sort of use some of the same rationale like in my picks, right?
Yeah, I think they're very similar. And I even know some coworkers that do player pools, and they, depending on how well the player does, they get points, and how far they go in the tournament, they get points.
Okay,
and
nice.
That's incredibly similar to FPL. So yeah, a lot of similarities.
Well, let's switch gears back to FPL, because even though you and I were off, or at least the games were off, the schedule update that came out this week was pretty massive, and I think reconfigures or recontextualizes a lot of the conversations that you and I have been having over the past couple of weeks. We got through this big blank game week in game week 29. We finally hit the international break, and then boom, here's kind of the run-in is sort of laid out for us in a way that's very interesting. So I think both for us and for our listeners, like this episode, we're not going to talk so much about our individual teams. We're more going to talk about general kind of like fixtures, our thoughts, and a recap or a potential like chip strategies that teams could employ. And in order to set the stage for that, I was thinking, let's just go through both 34 and 37, kind of call out in the schedule maybe where we see some opportunities. We'll do a quick roundup of the international break and any injuries, and then we'll go, I think, like a little bit deeper on the chip strategies. Does that work for you? I feel like we need to like set the scene here before we go like too deep into, wild card this, bench boost this.
For a week that didn't have any games, we sure have a lot to talk about on this podcast. So let's get into it.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so let's chunk them out. The first double game week is going to be double game week 34. Here are the teams, the double, here are the fixtures. Then we're going to pause and kind of talk through observations from this group. So we have Liverpool has away Fulham, away Everton. Arsenal has away Wolves and home Chelsea. Bournemouth has away Villa and away Wolves. Palace has home West Ham and home Newcastle. Wolves have home Arsenal, home Bournemouth. Everton have home Forest, home Liverpool. Sheffield United, home Burnley, and away Manchester United. So, Jace, after looking at this, what is the ideal Sheffield United triple up for their double game week? Who are you going after? I think that's the obvious place to start.
Yeah, no one actually. I guess if you're a real sicko, you could go for Fodderingham because he's going to be facing a lot of shots this week, so maybe you'll get the save points. But that's all I'm willing to give you there.
Yeah. On a serious note, kind of like of this list, any like initial thoughts or reactions from the teams at double?
Liverpool and Arsenal, I think, are the two main ones that people are going to gravitate towards. I don't know that they have incredible fixtures. Like, they're not facing two teams in the relegation battle. Arsenal are facing two really solid mid-table teams. Maybe Chelsea not yet mid-table, but they're trying really hard. And Liverpool, away to Fulham, and then a Merseyside derby at Everton. So some challenging fixtures, but all four fixtures are going to be full of goals. That I think we can be sure of. So they'll be entertaining at the least. And that's really the only two that make me really excited. Beyond that, I'm not seeing a ton. What do you think, Chris?
Interesting. I agreed on Liverpool Arsenal. I think you probably want to have at least 4 assets across those two teams. They also have a great fixture in game week 31, so it seems to line up that obviously. I mean, as 2 of the 3 best teams are going to be in your team anyway, but like especially with this double game week, I think they become priorities either on free transfers or with the chip. The one that I was kind of thinking of, how we were a little bit like critical of the Wolves move in game week 26 and the Bournemouth move in game week 28. I think a lot of those people just got bailed out because both teams have pretty good near-term fixtures and I think have pretty good doubles. So if you went like Sarabia, Semenyo, Tavernier, like on the one hand, those aren't great single game week picks. So now you're sort of like held hostage by those players. But on the other hand, I don't think buying them in those weeks looks quite as bad as it did kind of like right afterward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we just have to, again, throw up the cautionary phrase here is don't, you can't want the double game week too bad, right? You can't succumb to double game week fever. And the two that you just mentioned, Bournemouth and Wolves, are great if you've got them in your team, like you said, and you're held hostage, I guess, and they're still in your team in 34. But to me, I don't know that I'm using transfers to bring those players in. I think I'll take my previous statement back. I think Palace actually has a pretty decent 2 home games as well. Newcastle's been leaking goals. Yeah,
that was the other one because they have City and Arsenal in the 2 fixtures right beforehand, but then this like very juicy double game week, and they have away Fulham after, and they don't double in 36, they don't double in 37. So like they're okay to hold, but like an Eze Elise double up in game week 34 to me sounds like fun. And ultimately, like, we're trying to score as many points as possible, but having Eze Elise in a double game week with 2 home fixtures, if Elise is healthy, I think is like a very unique opportunity within this fixture ticker that doesn't really exist for some of the other teams.
With both of these sections, right, the double game week 34, double game week 37, it all depends on what chip strategy you're going to use. And that's going to dictate which of these sets of fixtures is the most attractive to you, right? And I think maybe 37 might have some even saucier fixtures for us.
Yeah. Let's go to 37. So these are just FYI not confirmed, but likely double game weeks. And it's basically all the teams that have an extra fixture that don't have a double game week in 34, which makes this especially challenging because there's no assets that double in 34 that also double in 37, which is kind of where the chips are going to come in. So 37, the likely double game weeks include Chelsea, away to Forest, away to Brighton, Spurs, home Burnley, home City, Brighton, away Newcastle, home Chelsea, City, away Fulham, away Spurs, United, home Arsenal, home Newcastle, and Newcastle, home Brighton, away United. I feel like those are like tongue twisters. Like I'm saying the same teams in different orders. I'm glad we
Yeah,
don't have
don't
to
try and
edit
say it too
any of
fast.
that. Yeah. What were your thoughts on like this group of teams?
I like these fixtures a lot better, I think, personally. I think you have some assets that are going to be pretty highly owned participating in all of these, right? You got City, you got Spurs, you got Chelsea, you've got United, you've got Newcastle, right? And more importantly, you are 3 games away from the end of the season here. So, game week 37, everybody's going to be, balls to the wall, pedal to the metal, want to win. You got City, who are going to be trying to keep Liverpool and Arsenal at bay. Spurs play 1 through 6, right, throughout the rest of the year. So they'll have a lot to say with that. And Chelsea probably don't want to end the season below mid table, right? They probably want to take a run towards United. So I think there's a lot of teams that have stuff to play for here. And to me, these are the more exciting set of fixtures. I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
I I think the 34 ones are more fun, and but to your point, it does depend a little bit on chip strategy here, because I think the assets in this group are going to be more expensive than a lot of the assets in the Game Week
Mm-hmm.
34 group, because you have City, Spurs, Chelsea, Newcastle, United, and especially like the United mids, like outside of Hoyland and Garnacho, like the two other assets are Bruno and Rashford. Like they're obviously overpriced. Dallo is in there. What is he, like five something? You're
Onana
gonna have
as a
you're gonna have
keeper.
Holland in this week. Onana's like five, right? Like this is a little bit like pricier to get in, whereas
Mm-hmm.
I think 34 is like a little bit cheaper to have a ticket. The team that stood out to me here the most was Newcastle, because they have Sheffield 35, Burnley 36, this double, and then Brentford 38, and they could still be playing for a European place at this point in the season.
Sure.
So like Isak,
Probably not, but who
Gordon,
knows?
yeah, probably not. But like we'll see, because you have to remember the correlation coefficient. Like England's going to have 5 Champions League places, likely sixth and
Yeah.
seventh for Europa League, and likely eighth for Conference League. Like it's very possible that the 6, 7, 8 spots come down to the final day. So I think they'll still be competitive, and Gordon and Isak are still very good single game week picks. You also have Dubravka that a lot of people are already on. And then we'll kind of talk about in the injury roundup, but Botman is injured, so Lascelles comes in as a 3.9 option. So
Right.
I think
Miley
they're
just got injured too.
right. You're going to have a lot of City assets at this point, probably no matter what. But I think Newcastle is a team that's going to become kind of that's not going to be as popular before 34. That's going to be very popular after 34.
Yeah. And you got to watch those Newcastle assets, just like everything looking as far ahead as we are into game week 37. People are going to get injured, right? Teams are going to dip in form. Some are going to peak. So the 37 is a lot harder to really get your hand around, right? Like I took a stab at an ideal free hit 37 and I found myself putting, Newcastle defender, United midfielder, right? Like insert here because I don't know who's going to be healthy, who's available, who's going to be starting. So just some things to keep in mind when you're looking this far ahead and planning in the game. So
Yeah, I think that's a great
yeah.
point. The further you are away from your wild card, like the less certainty you have about the specific lineup or the specific team, or
Mm-hmm.
even like I was saying, the competitive situation, which does tend to matter towards the end of the season. The last thing I want to talk about on the fixtures is Tottenham and Chelsea, since they're like the weird stepchildren of this like already pretty weird double game week situation. So because Chelsea made the FA Cup semifinals, Tottenham, who was their opponent in game week 34, Tottenham's going to blank. The Chelsea Tottenham fixture might be made up in game week 35, game week 36, which is the most likely, or an unlikely but possible triple game week in game week 37. This
Yeah.
really puts
This
Spurs, probably, is that what you're going to say? Like Spurs is in the most interesting
yeah.
spot here because
Yeah.
they blank in 34 when a lot of other teams double. But then they
Yep.
also double in 37 with that other group and have an additional double or an additional fixture somewhere between 35 and 37.
And they also have really good early fixtures, right? 30, 31, 32. We had talked about getting off of them on 34 because of that City fixture, but now they don't play.
Right.
So if you still have your free hit, and you like the Spurs assets and you want to use your wild card, those make a lot of sense to get, because then you can free hit them out for the week and then get them right back in for the upcoming double in 35, 36, or the potential triple, which would be incredible in 37. This Chelsea Tottenham fixture is a lot like me trying to make plans with my friend Zach. We usually have to reschedule 6 or 7 times, but when we do get together, it's a hell of a good time. So I am very excited for this match, not just because you're a Chelsea supporter, I'm a Spurs supporter, but we've got some demons to work out against Chelsea from that game earlier on in the season. So I think it's going to be a good one. And I can't wait to see when they schedule it, because could you just imagine a triple game week 37? Come on.
Yeah. If anybody's still hanging on to the triple captainship in game week 37, which, like, looking at this, if you still have it, it's probably Salah in 34 away, Fulham away, Everton. And I think this is from, Ben Krellen's fixture ticker at Ben Krellen on X. Like, this guy does an amazing job with kind of predicting blank and double game weeks. And he has the possible triple game week in game week 37 is a 5% likelihood. So I wouldn't necessarily plan or bank around that, but from a chaos perspective, like an FPL perspective, can you imagine the amount of hits that people would be taking to get Chelsea and Spurs assets in for a triple game week in game week 37?
Absolutely.
And just to wrap up that discussion, Chelsea also has an additional fixture between 35 and 37, but they do not blank in game week 34. They play away to Arsenal. So that is your fixture wrap up. The last thing that we'll mention here is that game week 30, the deadline is March 30th, and the game week 31 deadline is April 2nd. So if you are thinking of wildcarding in 30 to 31, or there's a critical transfer that you want to make in that window, don't forget that there is a very tight turnaround between those deadlines. Are we going to be podcasting on the game week 31 deadline next week? I know I won't be here, but will you and your surprise guest be podcasting next week during the
we'll try and get a pod out.
Okay, great. I was just curious. I don't know the schedule of my own show, so happy to see what you guys do with it. All right, let's move on to the international break, kind of roundup recap. I think we're mostly going to focus on just injuries, kind of give a quick update of some highly owned assets. So then if there's any takeaways from matches or player performances that, Jace, you feel passionately about, I think this is a good time to talk about them. But I think mostly we'll focus on kind of player status going into game week 30. Real quick, just to run through these, Holland had a scare in the Norway camp, but seems to be fine. I think he even played in their second fixture. Saka, Gabriel, and Martinelli were sent home early, which seems to be precautionary. Nunez, Kudus, also precautionary, sent home. Gusto had an illness, but came out that he should be ready for Burnley, so he should be all set. Palmer missed out against Brazil, but he was on the bench against Belgium, so also seems to be fine from a fitness standpoint. The big one, Botman, is out 6 to 9 months. Just want to call out again Lascelles as an option at 3.9 million, probably starting at the other center back position for Newcastle. And then just some others, players that picked up injuries. Kyle Walker, Sam Johnstone, Harry Maguire, Sinistera, Willie Boley, Matty Cash, Mengi, Martinelli, who I mentioned as precautionary earlier, actually. So scratch that. Senesi, Ederson, Bandier, Casemiro, Johnny Evans. And then also today, it seemed like Stones, Akanji, and Robbo were injured. So not sure on the severity of those yet. Anything else, Jace, that you wanted to add from international break?
No, the only thing, I know we don't put a lot of stock into international performances translating into the PL season, but I do want to say that Spurs assets have had a really, really good international break. Sonny scored twice, Kulusevski with 2 assists. Matters just had the game-tying assist for England's match against Belgium. Johnson on the score sheet, Davies in the back line there. So some really good production there from the Spurs assets on the international break, which could translate to form here in the coming game weeks.
Is the England match on right now? Was that a live update?
It just finished. Literally just finished. Matters came on. He was only on for 10 minutes, whatever. I don't know why it takes him so long to get on. for England, but had the game-winning assist, and the people on Twitter are going crazy about it. So it must have been a good one. So yeah, live update there for you.
Well, this is breaking news.
Breaking news, yeah.
That's really impressive. Okay, awesome. That's a great update. All right. With that, let's talk about our thoughts on the run-in and kind of chip and transfer strategy going into these last, I guess, 9 fixtures, 30 to 38, yeah, if you include 39 fixtures. So the final 9 fixtures. So Jace, I think the first debate that everybody's been having, one of the first debates that everybody's been having is to wildcard in game week 30 or to wildcard in game week 31. After seeing the fixtures and kind of like considering the other chips as well, where do you think you're falling on this debate?
Personally, since I still have my wild card, I'm still leaning towards wild card 31, strictly because I'm not really scared of any assets in game week 30, and I haven't used the wild card yet. So I feel like if you haven't used it yet, you're probably on the fence enough to hold it. So I think you hold it and you wait as long as you can. You know, you brought it up earlier. You want to anchor kind of your plans for your chip strategy, right, based around the wild card. So whether you're going to do it before 34, after 34, what you can hold on to, right, what your team currently looks like. So I think if you didn't dead end your team from that free hit in 29 and you can, you know, have a really decent team out in 30, you definitely wait until 31, if not later.
What you're saying is basically like you feel like most teams, or at least like your team, are likely to have better game week 30 fixtures, and we don't want a wild card out of like a good fixture week for kind of most of your team. Is that right?
The big issue is you got City and Arsenal playing each other, right? So City's attack, Arsenal defense, those are the big heavy owned assets. And we've seen this game before, right, where it ends up either like a 0-0 stinker or 1-1 stinker, whatever. And I know there's meaning behind this, right? This could theoretically be for the league, but I'm not scared of Saka or Haaland in this match. And those are the 2 assets that I really don't have. Salah has a decent game, but not something, again, that I don't think I can recover from. I've got good Spurs assets that play Luton. So I don't hate my team. I think I can definitely get by through one more game week. My only issue is in 31, I want Saka, I want Haaland, I want Salah. So that's when I think I'll have to wild card, because I do start to get scared of those guys after this first week back.
If you wild card 31 and you're going to wild card in some of the Arsenal assets and some of the Liverpool assets because they both have great fixtures in game week 31, are you still planning to use the free hit chip in game week 34? Because it sounds like you're getting on wildcard assets that already double in game week 34.
Yeah, so that is my plan. Initially, when we talked, I was going to bench boost in 34 because I like to use my bench boost as soon after my wild card as I can, like most other players in this game, right? Everybody has that similar kind of notion. But to me, my ideal wild card team that will take me to 34 doesn't have a ton of double game week assets in it for 34, and I still have my free hit. So to me, I like free hitting because I can keep the assets I want, which then do double in 37, right? Your City, your Spurs, your Chelsea, those teams that we talked about, I can kind of free hit them out for a week and then get them right back in and set my team up. And I can use my transfers to get to the rest of the players that I need. So I think I've got a really good wildcard foundation set up for 31 with a little bit of money left in the bank. It all depends on injuries, right, too. And that's what I want to see, if I can just buy myself an extra week of knowledge before I hit that wildcard button.
I think that makes a lot of sense to me. My case for game week 30, I think, is built around similar logic, which is that, like, when we look at these double game weeks, it seems like you want Arsenal, Liverpool early, and City, Chelsea, Spurs, Newcastle late. And you can kind of play around with the Bournemouth, the Wolves, the Everton, etc. But like, those are the big
fun
teams.
Ones. The fun
ones. Yeah, the fun punts are definitely in there, and they'll be in teams. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't own those players, but like, that's in my head, I think, where I have it at. And if you're wild carding in 31, I would almost go heavier on Liverpool and Arsenal because of the 31 fixture, which would lend itself more towards the bench boost in 34 rather than the free hit in 34. Whereas if I'm wild carding in 30, I think I'm going heavier on City, Chelsea, Spurs, and especially like Spurs have Luton this week
Yeah.
and Chelsea have Burnley this week, and then Sheffield coming up in 2 weeks. They're at Sheffield, home United, home Everton, like before 34. So I think that's where I'm like struggling with your team a little bit. And I'm not saying like if you wild card 31, you can't just get all the Chelsea and Spurs assets like anyway. But like if you're gonna wild card in 31, I'm like, I don't want you to give up too much against Sheffield United, because I think if you wild card 31, you have to have 6 assets between Arsenal and Liverpool is kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you at all there, but my only point is I have the free hit chip still, and I think I can get a full team of doublers as opposed to like 3 or 4 doublers with my bench boost, right? And then I can use my bench boost in 37 when I want all of those assets who will be playing. So I know I'm a little far away from the wild card in 37 to use the bench boost to its maximum effect. I'm sure there will be injuries and suspensions like Nunez that play into this, right? But to me, I still feel like the doublers are on less attractive teams, right? Like your Wolves, your Palace, Everton in that 34 fixture. And I want to own the assets in 37, potentially beyond 37, right? I want them before and after your Spurs, your City, like we just talked about. So to me, ideally, I'm going to wild card in 31, free hit in 34, bench boost in 37, if it makes sense, right? I may save the bench boost for the last game of the year just for shits and gigs, right? To give myself a little bit of an edge if it doesn't look as attractive. Yeah. Hey, we said it. Roll the credits. Roll the credits.
You always love when you see the title pop up. Yeah, that's like right. Free hit 38. I think we'll talk about like alternatives, but I think that's viable. I guess like let's talk about the bench boost then, because I think we're in agreement with like basically if you go heavy on Chelsea Spurs early, then 34 makes sense as the free hit, and then towards the end, you come back with a bench boost on the assets that you've basically just kept this entire time. My counter argument or like case for bench boost in 34 would be that Palace, or excuse me, so the downsides here, there's no clear third Chelsea or Spurs asset. I would say that's like number one. So if you're going to go heavy on Chelsea and heavy on Spurs, I think the obvious ones are Palmer and Gusto from Chelsea. And I think you have Son, and then either Porro and Udogie, and either Madison or Richarlison from Spurs is kind of like your pool of assets.
That's literally what I have written down, Chris, is right. Matters / Richie and PP / Udogie, right? Like that's literally what I got on my paper. You're exactly right.
But I think that Arsenal and Liverpool do have 6 assets that are stronger than the 6 assets from Chelsea and Spurs. So I would say like Salah, Nunez, Trent is a better triple than any of those other two. And then I would also say Saka, Arsenal defender, and then honestly take your pick, because Havertz like is in there in the midfield, Odegaard, second defender, like etc. So if I'm comparing like those 6 against the other 6, and again, this is a wild card 31, so they're going to play Sheffield and Luton, similar to Chelsea playing Burnley and Spurs playing Luton. Like would I rather have the 6 points from, or the 6 players from Arsenal, Liverpool versus Chelsea, Spurs? Like I almost think like that group of 6 is better.
Yeah, and if you're dealing with groups of 6, it makes sense, right? But I'm not saying you need 3 of one or the other, right? You can do 2 2 2 2. And I still think you can have a best of both worlds there, right? And that's what I guess my, again, word of caution here is, don't get distracted by the double game weeks, right? When you have single game week players that are still playing in good fixtures. Like my wildcard 31 team right now has 3 Liverpool, 2 Chelsea, 2 Spurs, and 3 Arsenal, right? So I think that I'm I'm pretty well covered there to really hit kind of the first four fixtures here. Free hit my Spurs team and
Right.
Chelsea played, right? The non-double game weekers out, and then I'll have them back to really build again towards that 37 and 35, 36 potential double whenever we find that out. And that's also assuming that Trent's going to play, but Trent's injured. We don't know when he's going to come back.
Trent's supposed to be back early April, and I think there's a version of Wildcard 31 where you can bench him, like at least for this week or potentially next week, and then get the double or just transfer him in. The other thing, like with that setup, is you just have to be cognizant, I think, of you're going to have to use transfers to convert those Arsenal Liverpool assets into that Spurs, Chelsea, City, Newcastle team, with also like getting the bench boost. You don't just need 11 players, you need 15 players. So it's like it does take like a lot of transfers to get there. The other case I want to make against bench boost 37, free hit 34 is that I think if you wildcard in 31 and you bench boost in 34, you can go without Holland. If you go without Holland, your bench boost is stronger. Whereas if you're bench boosting in 37, your bench boost is going to be like Dubravka, Lascelles, Garnacho, like maybe Anthony Gordon as your fifth midfielder. Like there's just not going to be as many funds to get additional players on your bench. Whereas in like 34, if you're playing for it, I think you could wildcard into a front three of Solanke, Nunez, Cunha, who all have great fixtures leading up to the double in 34, have pretty good double game weeks in 34, then go to Holland and Isak in 35, and then you're still kind of like set up for the run in. But downgrading your forward line is going to give you like a much stronger bench to where you might be able to bench boost like Eze Olise in that spot. And I think that's a significant upgrade over Garnacho and like Lascelles in the same spot.
Sure. And again, you're playing like we know these players are going to be back, right? Cunha's still injured, right? Still, there's a caution there. He's supposed to be back, but who knows what's going to happen, right? And in the same with Darwin, he could get a yellow card this week, next week. Likely he, gets suspended for the first game in the double game week of 34, and it screws everybody over, right? So there are some of these variables that we still need to wait and play out, which is again why I want to wait until game week 31 just to buy myself that extra 4 days of knowledge before I use the wild card. And how long would you hold on to a wild card if you still had it, Chris? Would you use 31-30, or would you hold it as long as you could without sacrificing too many points?
I think it depends on who you have. So like, I think you're probably okay without Salah this week. Like I'm gonna have Salah. I think you should have Salah, but like I wouldn't.
I'm gonna have him. You should have him, but
yeah,
whatever.
Very exclusive. I've got my limited edition Mo Salah for game week 30. Yeah, I think like that's just gonna help cover your rank a little bit in 30, but like 31 you have to have him. Like you have to have Salah and you like have to have Saka. So if you get to 31 and you can't get both of those players, then I think you pull it either way. However, if you can get those players, there's also a case, like to me, of building toward a team for game week 34 without using a chip, potentially wildcarding in game week 35, bench boosting in game week 37, and free hit in game week 38. I think it really just depends on like your 31 team and then how many double game weekers you can get for game week 34. Because if you can field like 8 or 9 doublers and a couple good single game week picks, your team is not going to be that different than the free hit team. And like that could be worth a -4, -8 to get that. And then, like I said, save your free hit for 38 when typically like a lot of people want to make transfers, take hits, etc. Because, some of the best players could not be playing or vice versa, etc. Like that's the week in which you have the most information because it's 1 week and you know exactly what everybody's playing for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
For me, if I'm going to argue against myself again, what I've been thinking about is like, I just made a case for bench boosting in 34, right? Which is like, you can go heavy on Arsenal and Liverpool in 31 for Sheffield, and you can probably get away without Holland, which gives you more funds for the bench boost. The opposite case is that you probably can't go heavy on Chelsea and Spurs, and you would potentially miss the additional fixture in 35, 36 prior to game week 37 if you didn't have them on your team. So that's sort of like what I think you're weighing is like the triple up from Liverpool and Arsenal is probably better than the triple up from Spurs and Chelsea. But if you hold Spurs and Chelsea, you would get an extra fixture in 35 or 36, like with those players. So I think, like for me, those are the two, like the angel and the devil on my shoulder, sort of with this argument.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
What do you think about free hitting in 37 versus the bench boost in 37? It sounded like you were kind of leaning towards bench boost.
Yeah, to me, I still feel like the bench boost suits my strategy leading me to the end of the season. I understood what you just said, right? I get it about the more funds, but to me, they're assets that I would want to own anyway. So I feel like I'm just going to have them through normal transfers without having to use that chip. So to me, the bench boost makes more sense to me. And, just for, like I said, for shits and gigs, I tried to put a free hit 37 team together, right? And it's, again, Newcastle defender, Manchester United midfielder, right? City defender. It's just, I don't know who is going to be in form at that point in time. And to me, I just feel like the free hit, I can see in 34 a clear picture of who I want, right? Who I think is going to be a great team full of doublers, who is going to claw me back a ton of rank, because a lot of people didn't save that free hit. And I don't think a lot of people are going to have those Wolves, Crystal Palace, Everton assets, right? I mean, maybe they will, maybe they won't. But to me, I don't think anyone's going to have that perfect template team that you talked about without sacrificing some transfers and points. So I think that's a clear way to get an edge up on the competition, as opposed to in 37, where those are more expensive assets, but I think they're going to be highly owned assets at that point. So I don't know. I feel like I could just differentiate myself with a free hit more in 34 and bench boost in 37 stroke 38, depending on how, the form is on my players and my team.
Yeah, I think like what you're saying is that 37, especially like City, Chelsea, Spurs, who we've talked about, you are more likely to just own those players anyway.
Right, because of the double we talked about.
Yeah. I think I would push back a little bit on like the certainty argument you made, where I actually think if there's less certainty, the free hit chip is better, because if you want to get to a bench boost without the wild card, you have to build that team like over basically the next 7 weeks, right? That's got to be in your transfer plan. And if somebody gets injured or gets a red card, or like we talked Nunez, like yellow card suspension, if that happens to somebody that you have, it sort of throws out your plan. It's like that time horizon is longer potentially between wild card and bench boost, and you need 15 players for the bench boost, not 11. So like there are more tenuous plans, I think, in place for that. Whereas like free hit, you can wake up after the deadline for 36 and build your team. And I think like have a high degree of confidence in who's playing, how are they playing, etc. The bench boost 37, like I talked about, the bench in 34 is probably better without Haaland. But also on the flip side, like if I was able to just name like 3 players that I want on my bench boost, like what you could say is that there's sort of an argument that there are better cheap assets on these teams that are easier to get into a bench boost team than there are in 34. Does that make sense? Like I think the bench in 37 is worse, but it also might be cheaper. And we have like a more certainty around who those assets are as like single game week picks.
No, like I said, I think the free hit in 34 is more attractive to me. A lot of managers aren't going to see it that way, right? And I think there are several that are going to hold their chips and play them in different weeks, and that's fine. But I think the team that I want, right, that I've built in my head is best set up for a free hit in 34 to really steer me into the bench boost in 37, albeit, like you said, cheaper assets, and that's fine as long as they play. I don't really care at that point. So okay. I think you made a lot of sense. We'll see where I land, right? Because at least I have the luxury of a wild card.
Yeah, that's the wild card at this point, I think is huge, especially if, well, I mean, I think for your team specifically, like I said, getting Salah and Saka back in for 31, like holding that wild card pays for itself at that point to get those guys back for that week. So, yeah, okay. The other question I want to throw at you, which doesn't apply to either of us, but applies to a lot of managers out there, is if you've already played the free hit chip at game week 29, but you still have your wild card and you still have your bench boost, would that change your strategy for utilizing the other two chips?
Yeah, definitely. I think in that reality, yeah, I think you're 100% right there in that I would, again, wild card in 30, 31, whatever, bench boost in 34, right? And then try and get to as many assets from there as I can into that 35, 36, 37 range because you don't have the free hit, right? But I still think I like those 37 assets better. And like you said, you can get some cheaper assets here for the wild card and the double and 34 to really boost that bench boost. See what I did there? So, and then it's easier to upgrade those assets. So I think that's the strategy I would use. Where would you go?
Yeah, I agree. If I didn't have the free hit, I would want my wild card to be closer to my bench boost because we talked about like the certainty, right? So if you wild card in 31, you can be reasonably certain in 34 of like player availability versus 37 when there's just like a much longer time horizon. That 31 wild card, again, you're probably without Holland, but if we look at the fixtures and like not just the Premier League fixtures, but the European fixtures as well, like City's best fixture in this window is home Luton in game week 33. That's between the two legs against Madrid. So like your hypothesis there would just be that, hey, we're getting 60 minutes of Holland or Holland's not going to start. Or like, I think there's a case that you can get lucky within that window, even though it's home Luton. If Holland scores a goal, I think you're fine. It's more like if he, puts up a hat trick, that's really going to hurt you. But like potentially he would be on a minutes restriction during that window. And then the only downside obviously is like you can't invest in Chelsea and Spurs really until game week 35 because of game week 34. So it would take an extra hit, essentially to get them in before their extra double. But I'm with you, like put the wild card and bench boost closer together, take the better, quote unquote, better bench boost in game week 34, then kind of like figure the rest out because we'll have more information at that point to play in your transfers. So I'm with you.
Yep.
Any alternative strategies to what we have talked about? I talked a lot about, not a lot. I talked a moderate amount, I guess, about, potentially not playing a chip in 34, wildcarding in 35, bench boost 37, free hit 38. Anything else that like stood out to you in terms of like how you could use those chips?
No, I think that's the only other strategy you can consider if your team is in a good enough shape right now, right, is holding that wild card until after that 34 double, because then you have all the information and you can really set yourself up for success in 37 and go for those more expensive assets without taking too many hits or clawing through your team. So I think that's the only one I would consider. But like you said, unfortunately, I don't have Salah, Saka, or Holland in my team. So I really think I need to use a wild card in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. And yeah, I think the other like obvious spot is the wild card between the double game weeks, because as we said, none of the teams that double in 34 also double in 37 and vice versa. And that's kind of like the key that the wild card in that spot would let you unlock, is being able to optimize for both depending on how strong of a team you can get to in 34 without a chip, which I think some people are going to be totally fine to do that. You still have like 5 transfer windows between then and now. So all right, let's move on to wildcard assets. We're going to go by position groups, starting with forwards and working our way back. We're going to quickly talk about locks, possibles, and could but you shouldn't, which are players that you could go for, but like you can kind of roll your eyes a little bit punty. Possibles are like definitely under consideration, and then locks are, hey, these guys should be in every single team. So Jace, do you want to read me off the forward assets by category that you selected?
The only lock I have, and this has an asterisk by it because if again he gets suspended, right, then it changes your plan, is Darwin. Okay. And then for possibles, I have pretty much every other forward that scored a point here in this game. So you got Holland, Watkins, Tony, Muniz, Morris, Solanke, and Isak. And the could but you shouldn't, I've got Nic Jackson, Højlund, and Didi Fofana.
Okay, we lined up on a couple of these that I actually thought were
Nice.
funny. Like I didn't think you would have these people. Okay, so I have also have Darwin as a lock. I think he's in every wild card team, regardless of your chip strategy,
Hmm.
because of the game week 31 fixture against Sheffield United. Like I think he's
Yeah.
absolutely in. I also had Solanke as a lock. Reason I had Solanke as a lock, great near term fixtures, kind of like an enabler for the rest of your team, and also has the double in 34. Like there was not a wild card draft I had that Solanke was not in. So I thought I had him actually in the lock tier as opposed to the possible tier. In the possibles, I had Holland, who I think is a lock if you are not bench boosting in 34, Isak, Cunha, and then Muniz if you want to play 3-5-2. And that's all I had in the possibles. So I
Yeah.
actually had Tony Watkins and Nic Jackson in the could but you shouldn't, which what a fall from grace for Ollie Watkins being in this like kind of quote unquote bad tier of potential wildcard forwards. Like if you're playing organically, like hold him, yeah, like for sure, no problem. But if you're
Yeah.
like using a chip here, I just like can't justify Watkins in the team versus like any of those other forwards. What do you think?
I think if he scores a hat trick this game week, then I'm probably going to keep Watkins in my team somehow. But I think he's too expensive to do what you want to do, right? If you want Holland and Darwin, you probably can't afford Watkins also. So you kind of have to pick your poison there between Darwin and Watkins and go from there. You're more on Cunha than I am. I know he's done really well, but I think he's injured, and I don't know that Wolves is going to keep up the form that they've had. And I also hear Gary O'Neill is on his way out and to United, so you never know how that news is going to affect a team too. So,
Whoa, I did not know that. For real?
it's the rumor. It's the rumor. My Wolves fans friends are saying they're scared he's going to leave for United. So just something to noodle on.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's a fixture play between those two for me,
Mm-hmm.
where Watkins has City and Arsenal in the next four, no double in 34, no double in 37, whereas Cunha has at Villa, at Burnley, home West Ham, at Forest, and then a double. And then Cunha also is a much better enabler for the bench boost than
Yeah.
Watkins. So I think that's
Yeah.
kind of like the case for him. If you're going to bench
Yeah.
boost in 34, like Cunha is like probably a lock.
Yeah, and I think your forwards are interchangeable here, right? Like Darwin, I think, is interchangeable for Isak after 34,
Yeah,
right? And
100%.
same with Nick Jackson too is going to be in a lot of people's teams. As much as we're going to hate to do it, everybody's going to consider him when that double gets announced. So
I love that you put Nick Jackson actually, because I put him as like kind of like shithousery to just be like, oh, Chelsea bias, haha. And then like you also had him. I thought that was incredible.
no, listen, he is the epitome of you could, but you shouldn't.
Yeah, yeah, that's
That's how he
actually
approaches playing football. Is I could play, but maybe I shouldn't. You know, I could score a goal, maybe I shouldn't.
we'll rename that category to the Nick Jackson could, but you
The Nick
shouldn't.
Jackson pick, yeah,
Yeah.
love that.
I'm sorry, Nick Jackson.
Oh, come on. You got to finish it if you're going to do it.
Let's move on to midfielders. Okay, I'll go first this time. My locks were Salah, Saka, Palmer. Palmer's still a lock for me, even without the 34 double, because he still has a fixture, and he's also really easy to move because of his price. So I think he's in regardless of your chip strategy. My possibles were Sun, which is a lock if you're going to free hit in 34. I don't think you need Sun. I mean, he's probably in, but if you're not going to free hit in 34 because Spurs don't have a fixture, maybe you take that extra midfield spot to Havertz or like an Arsenal or Liverpool asset. As a Garnacho, just because he's going to be a popular bench boost option in game week 37. So I think he makes sense to grab on wildcard here. And then Madison. My could, but you shouldn't were Elise. Brennan Johnson made the list. Shout out Brennan Johnson. Keeps popping up. And Kiwior from Arsenal. I thought if somebody wants to try and go cheap on an Arsenal defender, they might be tempted by Kiwior, and I just wouldn't do it for a minute's reasons. What about you?
You say Kiwi or cheap defender or cheap midfielder?
Cheap defender, 4.3. playing for Arsenal, but I think Zinchenko is back. We'll eat into some of those
Are we
minutes
talking? Are we
potentially.
talking midfielders? Or are we talking defenders?
We're talking midfielders. I don't know why I have Kiwior. Kiwior like stuck in
Okay.
it. He's so
I didn't know
irrelevant.
if he was. I didn't know if he was playing out of position or not. I was like, wait, hold on. This could be a good play.
Oh my god, he was so irrelevant. I put him in the wrong position group. Yeah. So
Right,
ignore
midfielders.
Kiwior.
Yeah.
So recap: locks Salah, Saka, Palmer, possibles Son, Havertz, Eze, Garnacho, Madison. Could but you shouldn't. Elise and Brennan Johnson. How about you?
Our locks are the exact same. Salah, Saka, Palmer, except I've got Son as a lock as well. Only again because I'm leaning towards free hit 34, and I love the Luton fixture at home. I think Sonny's been in good form. He's gonna want to score goals, go after that Golden Boot title, and what better game to start than Luton at home? They've given up a ton of goals this season, albeit mostly from a winning position in the last couple of matches. So I like Son as a lock for me.
Would he be in a 31 wild card because they have Luton home 30? So if you
Yes.
wild card 31, you would still put Son in.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
I have Son in my team right now who's playing against Luton this week again, which is why
Okay.
he's been biased here. But correct me if I'm wrong, Chris. But I think the perfect midfield, if you can afford it, is Son, Salah, Saka, Palmer, and Foden. I think
Yeah.
if you have a midfield, they're going to get you an F ton of points for the rest of the season. So I know Foden isn't super attractive right now, but after 34, I think he's going to be. So he's my first possible here. Is Foden, stroke KDB, one of those? I don't think you go both, but you probably need one of them if you're trying to have some fun. Another Arsenal midfielder, right? Odegaard, Martinelli, Havertz, one of those three. Garnacho, Gibbs White, David Luiz, Madison. I'm having trouble with my midfield if you
Yeah.
can't tell. I think there's so many options here at different price points.
Well,
And
let's talk about Foden because I think that's a good one. And then like
sure,
you can give me one of your others that you're sort of like stuck on the fence with. So the reason I didn't have Foden is because I think it's mostly like formation where it's really hard for me to get all five of those midfielders without downgrading the forward line. And if I downgrade the forward line, I'm going to bench boost in 34 and not include Holland, in which case, like,
sure.
Foden does not double in game week 34, and, like, therefore he's not in the team, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
If you're free hit 34 and you can fit all five of those guys and Holland and Salah, like, yeah, I'd consider, like, Foden. But I just didn't see from, like, a team structure standpoint, I think he'll be more relevant, like, later on 35 plus rather than kind of in this shorter window.
Who I really like is Gibbs White. And let me tell you why. Gibbs White is ranked 15th for expected points through the next 4 game weeks.
If
Right?
anybody
And he is
is listening, Jace is twirling his mustache. Well,
anyway, 15th, and he's only 5.7 million. So
yeah,
I think he's a good enabler. He's gonna play, and he's probably gonna get some returns. So I'm really leaning heavy on him. We can talk about that later. But as far as could but you shouldn't, I've got Rashford, Bruno, Bowen, Madison, Luis Diaz, Gallagher, Richarlison. So I did not put Brennan Johnson there, but I guess you could. I don't think he's going to play enough minutes consistently
yeah,
for him to be that third Spurs asset if that's where you want to go.
yeah.
Presumably you have Sonny and a defender. So yeah, we differ a lot here in the possibles and could but you shouldn't. But the locks I think are the most important piece where we agree there that you got to have Salah, Saka, Palmer in your team.
Yeah, and I think Sun as a lock is like fine, even if you're free hitting 34, as long as you can get him out before like the blank in 34 and you're gonna bench boost in 34, like I think it's fine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it sort of just like depends. And like I said, I think Havertz and Eze, that's like an easy place to go in midfield
Sure.
instead. Yeah, Brendan Johnson was like the third, right? What I was saying is like there's not a clear third Chelsea or clear third Spurs asset. I thought Brendan
Yeah.
Johnson is kind of your punty third Spurs player potentially.
Yeah. No, totally.
All right, let's go to defenders. We already know Kiwior is in the good but you shouldn't category. Do you want to give me yours first?
Yeah, I've got an Arsenal defender, right? So Gabriel, Ben White, Saliba, you got to have one of those in your team. Gusto and a Liverpool defender. So Van Dijk, Trent, Bradley, whichever one of those is playing healthy, I think you got to have one of them in your team. So an Arsenal defender, Gusto, and a Liverpool defender. For my possibles, Udogi, Pedro Porro, one of them, right? I think they're pretty much the same. I think a lot of people are going to lean on Udogi because he's cheaper and gives you pretty much the same expected output as Pedro Porro has in the last 3 fixtures, right? So my other possibles are Anthony Robinson, Nori, Dallo, and a Crystal Palace defender. So Chris Richards, Munoz, Mitchell. I like Munoz a lot. I think he's pretty tricky, and he's been looking to go forward, so could be a really fun pick to have for a defender you don't want to play, right? And finally, for my could but you shouldn't, I've got Doughty, Dunk, Estupinian, insert Man City defender here, and Senesi.
Okay, yeah, that's a good list. I could see, is Senesi just injury concern for you?
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of people went there and got burned. So
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So for me, locks, also Arsenal defender. I did not have any other locks. Just an Arsenal defender. I think is the only one that's in every team. For possibles, I had Poro or Udogi, similar to you, which I think is a lock if you're going to free hit in game week 34. If you're not going to free hit in game week 34, don't think they're a lock. Gusto, same thing, lock if you're going to free hit in 34. Potentially a lock anyway. He's so cheap that like even if you have him for the game week 34 Arsenal fixture, like that's not a big deal at all. So maybe I'll just like upgrade him to a lock. I'm glad Gusto's in the content cycle because we talked about him last week. I was like, oh, nobody's talking about Gusto, and now he's
I saw the price rise, and I was like, damn, Chris was onto something.
Yeah, the Chelsea like fixtures are just incredible, and maybe I'm closer to it as a Chelsea fan, but I was just looking at it like, yeah, their assets are going to be popular. I wish they had a third asset that was really good. I had Trent as a possible. I actually disagree with you on the other Liverpool defenders. I only want a Liverpool defender if it's Trent. I do not want Van Dijk. I do not want Bradley. I think Van Dijk is too expensive for kind of like not having a ton of goal threat. I know he scored this season, but like I don't see the offense there.
Multiple times. He scored the winner at Wembley,
which is not a Premier League game.
He still scored. Come on.
Yeah, that's fair. We can disagree. Like for me, I think he just doesn't have like the same offensive threat as like some of the other guys out there. Sure. I still think he's kind of in this like possible category potentially, but I just think like his price is too expensive for like, I don't know, Gabriel's a full $1 million cheaper. If it's Van Dijk or another Arsenal defender, like I'm just getting another Arsenal defender. But if Trent's available, I'd probably go Trent. Also Lascelles 3.9. Mention him for Newcastle, I think, as a bench enabler in a game week 37 doubler. Like he should be on the list. Branthwaite, 8 Nori or Wolves defender. I think we both had. I kind of like their defense for this upcoming run. And then could but you shouldn't. Yeah, here's Connor Bradley and VVD are both in this group for me, and then Kiwi are aforementioned. But yeah, I think some people might disagree with me on Liverpool defense, and if you think like Van Dijk has obviously like set piece potential, that's fine. I think it's like, what is he, 6.7? Yeah, it's just too much for a center back that like doesn't keep a ton of clean sheets for me. That's all.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right, let's move on to goalkeepers, the most exciting position in FPL, of course. I had no locks for goalkeeper. I didn't think there was a single goalkeeper that was like an obvious pick here.
Same.
Possibles, I had Petrovic, who's a lock if you're going to free hit in 34. Pickford, Neto, and Dubravka. I could, but you shouldn't. Kelleher, Raya, and Vicario. I think Vicario is actually a third Spurs pick. Their defense just kind of like sucks, but I think he's actually a very good goalkeeper. Notably, I guess I did not have Onana. I think I would just rather have, or Leno. I'd just rather have Dubravka. Leno should probably be in here, actually, because Fulham has a decent run, just like no doubles. So maybe like Leno's the bench keeper. I don't know. What did you think of that list?
No, I agreed on the locks. There are no locks. I think people are going to go a lot of different ways with the goalkeeper, which is going to be a good option to differentiate yourself. I mean, for my possibles, I think Leno and Onana have to top the list because they're the top point scorers in FPL for goalkeepers this season so far. And Onana does have the double coming up. So just something to think about there. I also had Petrovic, Kelleher, Areola, and Pickford. Kelleher is obviously, there's a flag there because, maybe Allison comes back and then that plan goes out the window. We don't know how soon that's supposed to be, right? Supposedly he's going to be out for a couple more weeks, but Not something I want to bet my potential future bench boost on, right?
Yeah.
So, and then in my could, but you shouldn't, I have Neto. I think he's a really good pick for saves, right? But I think they give up a lot of goals. So I don't know that I would go there. And I also put Fleck and Johnstone and Joseph Saw there as well, again, for the potential double, if that's where you want to go for your bench boost in 34, right? And you're not going to free hit. I think either Jose Sa or Johnstone are fine options as long as
Yeah.
Johnstone keeps his starting spot because he went home from the England camp with a hurt elbow a couple days ago. They said it's nothing serious, but just something you want to watch out for.
Yeah. Johnstone too, City and Liverpool in 32 and 33, which is where like the free hit for Palace is better. Like I would have him in my free hit keepers list, but not necessarily my wildcard keepers list, just given their upcoming fixtures. I think it's a fine argument on Leno and Onana too with, hey, they have the double in 37, you're going to free hit in 34. Like it makes sense to just like go ahead and get your bench boost keeper essentially like set up for 37. Or I guess I should say Onana does have a double in 37. Leno does not. So like maybe you go get Onana and Dubravka, then you've got United and Newcastle for 37 bench boost.
I think the thing is with the keepers, no keeper has kept a ton of clean sheets this season, right? A lot of people haven't been banking on those keeper points. So it's a good opportunity to differentiate yourself, but I don't think you're going to lose your rank by picking the wrong keeper here. I think it's going to be about as long as it is wide.
Yeah, and that's why I had Raya on could but you shouldn't too, because like he arguably is the keeper playing for the best defense, but like I'd rather just use my 3 Arsenal picks elsewhere. Like it's almost like Raya in a vacuum is a good pick, but actually in the context of the game where we can only have 3 players per team, like I actually think he's not a good pick. He's actually a bad pick because of the opportunity cost on Arsenal assets. All right, let's move on to our final segment, the moment of truth of this podcast. I think from our conversations, I have sort of like hypotheses about what your teams are going to look like and what my teams are going to look like, but I'm excited to go through them. So Jason and I have both prepared a game week 30 wildcard team and a game week 31 wildcard team, kind of based on the list that we had generated above and kind of our thoughts on the upcoming chip strategies. So Jace, why don't you go first and talk me through your picks for a potential game week 30 wildcard and then also kind of the associated chip assumptions that you're making with that team.
Yeah, right now, so if I was going to game week, or if I was going to wildcard in game week 30, so right now I would probably stick with my goalkeeper combo of Leno and Kelleher. I would go defenders of Munoz, Palace, Udogi, Robinson, Gusto, and Gabriel. Midfield of Salah, Palmer, Gibbs, White, Saka, and Son. And a forward line of Holland, Muniz, and Darwin.
That is a wild midfield. Can you walk me through just like those picks one more time?
Yeah, so Salah, Palmer, Morgan, Gibbs, White, Saka, and Son as a midfield with the intent of playing the 3-5 in the midfield. So I think, again, you got to have Salah, you got to have Saka, got to have Palmer. Sonny, again, Luton fixture, right? Really nice fixtures up front with the potential for me to free hit him out. I'm not wildcarding this week, so this was kind of like I didn't put a lot of effort into this team because I like most of the team that I have. But the big ones are Salah and Saka. So
yeah, and in this team, what you're saying is essentially you would free hit in 34, and this team would be geared up for game week 37 bench boost.
Yep, I'd have some really good options to move some money around, right? I'm cheap at the back. I'm cheap with my second keeper. So as long as Kelleher's still playing, I'm good. If not, I'm going to have to use a transfer to get Kelleher into someone who's playing, right? Fully knowing that's a possibility. But as you notice, I did not go with a Liverpool defender in this one.
Yeah. I guess my question is like, if you're going to free hit in 34 in this version, I think I'd probably take Madison over Gibbs White in that spot because then you're going to get the benefit.
Don't have the money.
No money in this version. Okay.
No money, right? Because I got $1 million. Sorry, you can't see my notes. I have $1 million left in the bank
in this one. Well, can we drop?
Can
we drop Munoz? Because again, I think like Palace have bad fixtures unless you're free hitting in 34.
Yeah, but he's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not super expensive, so I don't. Listen, I could make some sacrifices and probably get upgrade Gibbs White to Madison, and then downgrade Madison to Gibbs White with a transfer to the coming weeks if I wanted to, or whatever. But like I said, I only have like around $1 million left in the bank. I don't know what it is right now because the price rise. I haven't kept up with the price rises over the last 2 days, so maybe some of these have gone up. I don't think there's been any major ones, but I had $1 million left in the bank, so I tried to maximize again expected points. Right, so I walked you through this. I went with the must-haves, the nice-to-haves, and the enablers, just kind of like what we did. And I tried to put a team together that fit within my budget, that gave me room to upgrade if I need it, while maximizing expected points for the next 4 fixtures.
Okay. So sort of a flexibility here, but good near term. Basically like not selling out, really for a free hit or a bench boost, but just like kind of a well-balanced unit.
I think I did the math.
Free hit.
And the free hit teams, whether I do it in 30 or 31, should net me around 69 points. Nice. Each week for the next 4 weeks, which is what my target was.
Okay. Awesome. All right. My game week 30 team, I had a forward line of Holland, Solanke, and Nunez. This team, because it has Holland, would be free hitting in game week 34. A midfield of Salah, Saka, Son, Palmer, Garnacho. So I'm going to go ahead and get my game week 37 bench boost asset in Garnacho attached to the 4 best midfielders in the game.
Sure.
Defense of Porro, Gusto, Gabriel, Branthwaite, and Lascelles. And Lascelles is another potential game week 37 bench boost asset for Newcastle. And then I've got 3 defenders that are under 4.3 or whatever between Gusto, Branthwaite, and Lascelles, each of whom have a double game week. Goalkeepers would be Petrovic and Dubravka. What this draft does is give me triple Chelsea and double Spurs, which is 5 extra fixtures in either game week 35 or game week 36. This team also has 11 home fixtures in game week 30. You have 4 Arsenal and Liverpool assets, which give you cover on the Sheffield game week 31. 6 doublers in game week 34, so you don't necessarily have to free hit. And then 8 projected doublers in game week 37. So there's kind of a realistic number of transfers to get you to kind of a full bench boost team. What do you think about that squad?
It's a good squad, Chris. I think you got a good plan. I don't know that I'm going to Solanke as that third forward. I don't know if you plan on playing 3 forwards, but yeah. I get that he doubles in 34, but I just feel like his form's been really down coming into the international break. I know he scored that 1 goal, which was pretty sick, but we haven't been seeing the production that we're used to with Solanke. So yeah. I think he's interchangeable with a cheaper forward if you need an enabler. I don't know that I like the Lascelles and Dubravka pick. I think Newcastle have been giving up a ton of goals, so I don't see a lot of clean sheets there. I know Lascelles, maybe he gets an attacking return and they're going to face a lot of shots, right? So maybe make up for it and save points, but I'm not confident in those picks in the back line to get you the clean sheet points that you're looking for. I get that they double, totally understand it, but those were, and you can tell how we have the different approaches here because I don't have any Newcastle in my team.
Well,
so
I think that speaks back to the conflict we talked about earlier, which was like 37. Hey, I just pointed out some cheap assets that would be great bench boost candidates, but they're also like worse bench boost players than what you could probably come up with in 34 on a game week 31 wildcard, which I think we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that next. On Solanke, I think it's just fixtures for me. Everton at home, Palace at home, Luton away, United at home, double. So 3 out of the 4 home fixtures. His only away fixture is Luton, and then a double game week. I think they're both away fixtures, so it's not a great double game week, but I think that's enough for me to keep Solanke, especially like a lot of people have owned him and have team value in him too. So if you're thinking about your wild card, maybe it makes sense to hang on to that a little bit longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's talk about wildcard 31. This is where I went off the rails. So I hope you're ready for this one.
That's
This is a
crazy
lot of
because
fun.
my 30 team is not much different than my 31 team. I mean,
Okay.
there's a few spots that I've changed, right? But then this is the team that I'm on right now. So this
Yeah.
as soon as that deadline closes, I'm activating it, and this is the team I'm getting in right now for 31, right?
Okay.
And
Do
it's
you want to
Leno.
do Okay, I was going to say, do you want to do yours first cuz then I'm going to
Yeah,
blow your mind.
there you go.
Okay.
Blow my mind. Yeah, Leno and Onana in the back line. Defense of Bradley, Udogi, Robinson, Gusto, Gabriel. Midfield of Salah, Palmer, Gibbs White, Saka Sun, and then the forward line again of Holland, Muniz, and Darwin. And that gives me slightly less in the bank. I think I have like zero point 0.4 million left in the bank at that point if this is the wild card 31 team I go with.
So what are the big changes here? Onana
The
instead of
goalkeeper
Gallagher,
in Bradley, yeah. Yeah.
and then you grab a Liverpool defender instead of.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Munoz. But again, I'm not going to wild card in 30. So this is the team I'm leaning towards, and I think it gives me enough flexibility to make the moves that we talked about earlier in the pod with the free hit in 34, and then I can transfer my way into the bench boost in 37.
Okay.
So could blow my mind, Chris. Give me 30. Give me your 31 wild card team.
All right. My 31 wildcard team is targeted at the bench boost in 34. So it looks very different than a free hit 34 team.
Bring it on.
So forward line of Solanke, Cunha, Nunez, no Holland, but you've got three doublers, including
Sure.
Nunez, who we both had as locks, and Solanke, who I had as a lock. Midfield of Palmer, Salah, Saka, Son, Eze. So I have Eze over Gibbs White in that spot because of the Palace double game week, if we're thinking about bench boost here. Defense of Trent, who's very expensive. So, not having Holland, I think, allows you to bring in him as the Liverpool defender.
If he's healthy.
If he's healthy, you might have to bench him for a week, which is a tough thing to do on a wild card. Defense of Trent, Branthwaite, Everton has a double. Eight Nori, Wolves has a double. Gabriel, Arsenal has a double. And then Richards, Palace has a double. Goalkeepers of Neto and Pickford. What this team does that I think is like a little bit different than some of the other ones. And I had Havertz actually in here too instead of Son, but ultimately like went with Son because I think you can go Son to Havertz. Well, actually, like let me take that back. If we're skipping if this is a 31 wildcard team and Son has already played Luton, then I actually am going to have Havertz in the midfield over Son. So the midfield is Palmer, Salah, Saka, Havertz, Eze, just to clarify.
Sure.
So what this team does is it gives you 6 Arsenal and Liverpool players for game week 31 pending Trent's availability, which is a great point. Like maybe you take Bradley instead of Trent and get Trent later. It also gives you 13 or 14 with Havertz double game weekers for game week 34 on the bench boost. The only player who's not would be Palmer, and it's very easy to move Palmer to Elise or another midfielder that you want for the double game week because this is a pretty low budget team. I think there's like 6 million in the bank or something crazy on this team, so you have a lot of flexibility here. It also like gives you enough money for Holland in game week 35. So it's like very easy after game week 34 to get back to Holland in the striker position and start building for game week 37. So thoughts on that? It's like a very different team, but really like going after the bench boost as aggressively as possible.
Yeah. I love it. I'm going to steal it. No, I'm just kidding. I think that's a really well thought out plan if you've got the wild card and you're going to really steer hard into that bench boost and not free hit into that double game week in 34.
Does that team make you think at all, or you feel like pretty good about, hey, free hit 34
No,
on Spurs?
Listen, Chris, you always make me think on this podcast, which is why I like doing it. Nobody might listen to it, but at least I'm going to improve my rank at some point. So the only thing you can change here, right, is you could swap out Munoz for Richards, right? I think he's a little more attacking. You're banking on Richards playing in the center midfield there, I think, and maybe potentially getting an assist or something. Because I don't think he's gonna like return for you. He might get a header, right? But I think that's the same as having a Van Dijk back there. So,
Yep.
so that would, and you already made the Havertz point. If you're not going to do this until 31, and you don't have Son, obviously Havertz or insert Arsenal midfielder here,
Yep.
right, is the better option. That's what I was going to ask: is how much money was left in the bank with this team?
Yeah, it's like 6 million. So there's plenty to work with. It's easy to get back to Holland. You can kind of like swap players in and out. I went cheaper on the Palace defense because my thought was like, well, you're going to have like a 3.9 defender on the end of your bench anyway. So if you go Richards, like you don't have to worry about a Munoz transfer like out later because you can just stash Richards on the bench. But like, yeah, you could totally upgrade to Munoz or Mitchell and hope for an attacking return from a Palace defender in their double. I think that's very reasonable.
Yeah, you went off the rails. I'm not sold on Nori or the Wolves defense or the Everton defense or Trent playing. But listen, if the stars align, you got a hell of a double game week bench boost here.
Yeah, I think having like you would have all 15 for the bench boost, and I think there's like better bench boost assets again in 34 versus 37. But that's sort of like the underlying hypothesis here, right? If you don't believe that to be true, then like yeah, I would go more towards our game week 30 wildcard teams than 31. But just kind of gives a different perspective, I think, which is good.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking.
All right, last thoughts. We talked about our individual teams last week. We talked about transfers, captaincy, Salah, Son, Palmer kind of as the main captain options. Did you kind of lean a particular direction since we talked last week? I think I'm still sort of deciding between the three.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm actually between. I've got Watkins still, so I'm between Sonny and Watkins for the armband this week. I brought Gusto in on that move. If I end up not wildcarding in 31, right, and pushing it, I might take a -4 for a forward.
Yeah.
Or for Salah Saka, right, one of those. So I have him for this week and can start building towards the team we talked about. But most likely I'm going to wildcard in 31. So
yeah, how are you feeling about hits this week, given you're going to wildcard next week? Like it's hard to take a hit.
Yeah, don't
wildcard.
Yeah, don't take a hit if you're going to wildcard, in my opinion, right? And that's the whole point. If you think you have to take a hit, I would just say wildcard, right? Save yourself the -4.
Yeah, that's it. If the wildcard team looks more like your 30 and 31 wildcard teams, then I think that's right. You would just take the game week 30 wildcard team, and if one or two players are different, that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
I agree.
But if you're not going to wildcard, take as many hits as you want. This is the time to do it, right? We're in the run-in. This is where you're going to get ranked. So the sooner you do it, the sooner they'll pay those points back. So go crazy.
Yeah, that's fair. For me, I think I'm on Salah. I haven't made the transfer in yet, but I will. Just given the fact that he was rested during the international break, whereas like Son was playing. The other thing for Salah is like, yeah, and scoring, that's true. But like the other thing for Salah is like, even in a vacuum, Salah's like per 90 numbers are still substantially better than Son's, and Son's are really good. So it's just going to be hard for me in a week where Salah is lower owned. Like this is one of the only weeks Salah is going to be a differential, and I have the Son points to cover in case he gets a hat trick. Like, so for me, I think I'm leaning more Salah, and potentially like gain some nice some rank out of that. All right, I think that's everything that we have for you. Hopefully we've made the chip strategy more clear instead of more confusing. I don't know, Jace, how do you think we did?
Yeah, well, I'm more confused now, but I don't think that's a bad thing, right? Like, I think that's good. You're thinking, and I have a lot of options, which again, not a bad thing. So the good news is we're coming back up this weekend. We've got games again. We'll get more information on 30. I still think if you can, you hold the wild card until at least between 30 and 31 and get that extra week, see who's back, see who's playing, all that stuff. But yeah, lots to think about as always, Chris.
Yeah, well, good. I'm glad that we could have this discussion because, you know, obviously, like, again, in the FPL discourse, right, a lot of the conversation is, wildcard 30 or wildcard 31. And I think like what we're trying to do is say like that's a very binary way of thinking, right? And actually like you could wildcard in any of these weeks and kind of think beyond sort of some of the template teams. So I'm glad that that came out in our conversation today. I feel like we did give people some additional things to think about. Honestly, it's almost easier for me not having the wild card chip. Like my plan is very straightforward. It's like not hard to figure out what to do. Whereas if you have the wild card, like you have way more headaches, I think, at this point in the season, which is interesting. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Just a reminder, please rate, review, and subscribe to our show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. We really, really appreciate reviews as we are still a new podcast. Just a reminder, you can also follow us on X, Instagram, and Threads at FPL_freehitpod, and join Jace and a special guest next week to talk about, I guess, both Game Week 30 and Game Week 31. So yeah, we'll kind of like see when you guys end up recording, but I'm going to be on vacation next week, but there will be an episode that comes out to kind of talk about wildcard aftermath, especially in the wake of Game Week 30. So that's it, everybody. Thanks again, and take care.